would you raise your right hand? You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
State your name for the record.
Leopoldo de la Torre, Jr.
Where do you work?
I work for the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Office here in Houston, Texas.
How long have you worked for the Immigration Service?
Immigration in its total amount is about 16 years. That's for him.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thanks. 16 years for the INS?
Right, about more or less.
And how long have you worked in Houston for them?
It'll be 8 years in June.
And what is your current job title there?
I'm Supervisory Detention and Deportation Officer.
Supervisory Detention and Deportation Officer?
That's correct.
How long have you had that position?
Okay, 5 years.
Do you know anything about this case?
I don't have the authority to make decisions.
So you never did anything with Mr. Huang's file, and is that right?
Make recommendations, but I don't make
Well,
decisions.
that's my question. Maybe you misunderstood my question. So you made some recommendations in connection with his file?
That's correct.
And that would have been at the time that my office was requesting that the bond be canceled?
That is correct.
Okay. And your recommendations were made to who?
The district director.
Okay, and were those recommendations made on your review of his A file at your office?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, do you recall anything from the time that you made that review that would indicate that the information on document 004 is not true or correct? Do you recall seeing anything to that effect?
From the best of my recollection, this form that you're talking about did not appear or was not submitted till sometime after the breach had already taken place.
That's not my question. Do you want me to restate the question for you?
Go ahead.
My question was, do you recall from the time that you made recommendations in connection with my office asking for a cancellation and a refund, whether or not there was anything in the file that indicated information on that document in front of you was not true and correct? How did you, back in 1990 and 91, make a decision on whether or not there was a substantial breach of any particular bond? Let's talk about immigration bonds or detention bonds that we've been talking about.
Well, the breach would have occurred, or the violation they're talking about here is a violation of the conditions is that the obligor did not present the individual they're supposed to on the day of request.
Okay, you're the person who made the recommendation to the district director that the bond not be canceled and that the money not be refunded. Is that correct?
Now, let me just say that the bond had already been breached. In this case, from what I recall, in Mr. Wang's case, the bond had already been breached. There was a final decision made, and the request was not so much to cancel the bond. Initially, it was a request to have the money refunded, but it was after the fact.
Well, I was trying to use your words, but let me use your words as you've now stated it. My office requested that the bond money be refunded. Are you the person at the service who recommended to the district director that the money not be refunded?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that because you felt there was a substantial breach of the bond?
That's correct.
You would agree that if it was not a substantial breach of the bond, even though the bond was breached, but if it was not a substantial breach, that the money should have been refunded. Would you agree with that?
To me, there was a substantial violation of the conditions.
Okay, and if there was not a substantial violation of the conditions, or a substantial breach, would you have recommended that the money be refunded?
Yes.
Wait a minute. No, I want to make sure that the question is clarified. You're talking about this particular case where after the obligor has received the notice of the breach and the time for appeal has expired, would you then recommend, even though the time for appeal has expired, that the bond be returned if there was not a substantial.
Now, if there was no appeal filed and that time expired, no, I would not recommend they change the decision on that.
And you would not recommend that, even though somebody else looking at it might determine that it was not a substantial breach?
I can only go by with, as far as what's there at the time. And in this case, there was already a breach, there was an appeal period, and there was no appeal filed. And so, in my view of this, there was no longer a bond in question.
The breach that
Would not rephrase it, but I can repeat the question, I guess.
Yeah, at the time that I made the request for the refund of the bond money in this case, and you made the recommendation that it not be refunded, you didn't have any reason to believe that Mr. Huang was still in the United States at that time, did you?
At the time that the request was made, I really didn't think whether or not, it didn't come to mind whether or not he was in the United States or not.
But you didn't have any evidence that he was here, did you?
No.
Oh. And you did have some evidence, whatever weight you give it, and I think you said you don't give it much, but you did have some evidence in the file that he was not here, that being document 004, correct?
Again, all this was presented after...
I understand that, but that's not
Okay.
my question.
Okay.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right.